Thank you, Justin, and thank you all. Now, you can all see why I was so thrilled to find out that I was going to have the privilege of co-speaking with this young man. Not only does he speak thoughtfully to the anxieties many of us have felt, he also demonstrates how to find value in those experiences. He also has some pretty killer jokes. I don't know if you picked up on all of them. For my first program today, I wanted to echo much of what Justin described earlier. I want you to take a moment to think about why you're here today. What mistakes or surprises led you down the path that you took? Who helped you get here? Your family, your friends, your mentors, your colleagues? How many challenges did you encounter on the way? What stories do you have about mishaps, adventures, wrong turns, or getting lost? But before I go any further, I want to provide a disclaimer that this is not actually a speech about overcoming obstacles to achieve success. I will not be using the metaphor of roads, traveled more or less depending on who you ask, to describe your time here as a journey with detours or a destination. Instead, I'll be relying on my training as an English major to describe our time here as a narrative, to which I'll return later. But for now, know that your ultimate accomplishment on this day is not actually graduating, though that is really nice and it is a part of it. But I can tell by your faces that some of you have waited ages for this moment to come, and some of you hope this moment would never come. The moment you thought would end all other moments. The culmination of it all, graduation. The tipping point that marks what we've done and what we're capable of in the future. The entry point into real life, which is a phrase I've never particularly liked. Real life only happens after college, they tell us. But I've heard this said repeatedly. I've always been slightly skeptical. Because if you know the people I know and have seen the incredible things that students on this campus and in this program are capable of, then you know that these students do not treat this time as it exists in a vacuum. You would know that students here seek to maximize the opportunities and resources they have as a college student to impact communities around them in complex ways that extend beyond the conventional boundaries of the University of Washington. In fact, it's directly because of these experiences that these students are able to problematize that perceived distinction between our time here and our time after this moment, out in the world that apparently we lay no claim to yet. Here, we learn by trying. We try better because we've learned. In many ways, those students who have had the biggest impact on those around them and look closely because they're around you here today have held themselves open to being radically changed by their experiences. And that is a skill that will prove invaluable to those students and all of us far after our college years are over. So what's the difference between those who use this time to grow and those who treat this time as a 4-year intermission before entering life? My answer would be a story. Foreshadowing going on there. Those who have honestly and incredulously examined their own past decisions, identified the areas in which they could improve, and capitalized on the power of reflection to integrate their goals with their strengths. Those people are certainly aware of the power of their own narrative. Let me give you an example from my own time here to explain. One of the most transformative experiences I've had at this university came in the form of a rather unpleasant surprise. At the end of my freshman year, I applied to become an Honors 100 peer educator, which essentially meant that I would be the instructor of record for an introductory seminar and responsible for leading a cohort of incoming freshmen. This turned out to be a classic example of misinterpreting one's own strengths. I was eager to share my enthusiasm with the incoming class, to help them become as jazzed as I was, and I thought for sure I would flourish in the role in front of the classroom. I immediately learned 2 things. 1, teaching is way harder than I thought it would be, and 2, I had no idea what I was talking about. When I was teaching my students, who were barely a year younger than I was, about the honors curriculum, I had a mere 3 honors classes under my belt. When I reviewed experiential learning project options, I hadn't completed an experiential learning project. Studied broad, hadn't done that. Research, couldn't tell you, hadn't done it. Leadership opportunities, nope, not that either. How to be successful at this university? Well, I will let you know when I find out. Fast forward 2 years. I'm now a senior, returning from my 3rd year as a peer educator. I had learned a lot and gained a lot of confidence through this process because of personal reflection and the course evaluation sheets I received at the end of the quarter helped too. I also had the chance to implement the suggested changes in my pedagogical approach for 3 whole years, honing and nuancing my techniques. I was by no means an expert, but I was learning how to do a little tiny bit better each year. 3rd time's the charm, they say. But this confidence wasn't just the result of having actually done the things I was talking about, but from being able to communicate the significance of these experiences. I could finally begin to articulate my own narrative. I could explain why being shaken and small in the humid heat of a Moroccan Medina that was thousands of years old was important to my philosophy on change and my definition of home. I could explain how radically the process of writing a thesis and conducting interviews had been in developing my thoughts on systems-level thinking and education. I could explain how leadership is both a simultaneously political and personal process that, if it is to be carried out effectively, must be a project based on reciprocity, respect, and revision. I could explain that being successful at this university, or at any point in your life, is just about deciding for yourself what to do with the only two currencies that you control, your time and your energy. And while I can't pretend that these stories had a huge impact on my students, I can absolutely attest to the impact this shift had on me. I realized all the ways in which I had taken ownership of my education and could explain why that mattered. I'm sure many of you have had that moment where you realize you're not on a path, but a trajectory that disappears somewhere beyond your line of sight. For some of you, that came after success. For some of you, that came after a failure. But that's okay, because in the end, we learn a lot more when we are disoriented and have to trust ourselves to learn to navigate. Really, isn't it? Don't forget that feeling, and don't forget that you're on your way somewhere, even if that somewhere is out of sight. Like Justin said, you don't have to have a plan. Just make a series of good decisions, one after the other. In closing, I want to turn to that iconic question I'm sure you've all been asked an absurd number of times. What are you doing after graduation? When faced with that question, I've normally blushed and shrugged. I dead-ended and occasionally would launch into a full-fledged existential crisis. You can ask my parents and roommates because they heard a lot about that. So I'm not actually going to ask you that question because it's an easy question, and I'm not terribly interested in the answer. I'm going to ask you, how did you get here, and why does your story matter? And that, fellow graduates, is a question you can be answering for a very long time. Thank you again for your time, and congratulations.